So exciting. Okay, so we're now live on Facebook. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am so excited to have with us here today a great friend of mine, well, an acquaintance. Now I feel like she's a great friend. I've read her whole life story. This is Beth Bullard. And I'm going to allow you or ask you to introduce yourself in just a second, but I wanted to just tell a little background of like how we met. We originally met at a networking, the Launch Ladies networking event when it was at Cafe Vino. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember that.
Mm-hmm. And it was, I just was really like taken with you. You had such a magnetic personality and such an amazing story. And I think you were in the process of, had just finished writing your book, or you were writing it, and it was kind of towards the end of that process. And I just couldn't wait to like read it and hear, get to see it come to life. And then we ran into each other at the Launch Ladies. When was that? October or something?
October, for beginning of November?
November?
No, end of October.
Yeah. And the book is done. And so I got to read it, and thinking about you and your background and hearing you talk, I was just so taken with your story. And I thought about all of the ladies in this group and how you would be such a great inspiration to them. And so here we have you here. So I'm so thrilled. So I would just love it if you would just introduce yourself and your story a little bit, and then we'll just dive in and talk about. Okay. So really my intention today is just, thinking about giving folks perspective on life and what it takes to really thrive despite uncertainty, and thrive through uncertainty and tragedy, and really finding your joy on the other side and what that means. And we are talking about joy in January, and so this just fits in so perfectly. So Beth, let's hear it. Tell us about you.
Hi everybody, I'm so excited to be with you guys today, and honored to be along with other solopreneurs, because that is now sort of what I call myself. But I am an occupational therapist by background, and I've got over 30 years in healthcare. And in that healthcare journey, I was a clinician, I became an educator, a director, and then had the opportunity to become a chief operating officer, and then the CEO of Northern Colorado Rehab Hospital for 6 years. A wonderful journey, learned a lot about all operations of hospitals and everything else. And in 2015, unexpectedly, I was widowed. In the blink of an eye, I lost my husband in an accident. And it was July 31st. And so in that time, I had to decide, where am I headed now? What's going on? And at the beginning, work and having my children, I have 2 children. They're now 17 and 21, but they were, 5 years younger then. So I was a single mom, a CEO, and a grieving widow, and all those things didn't really go well together. I did well for the beginning, and I started going through the process. But what I really started to learn for myself is my children were on the right track, but I wasn't. And there was a pause where I didn't feel like I was home enough, and I didn't feel like I could give the hospital what they needed. And what I really needed to do is give myself what I needed. And so I sort of had an epiphany moment in 2018 and said, you know what? It's time to walk away, and it's time to do something for myself. And so I did just that. And in that time, the journey, I was able to heal. And I knew within 2 weeks of Greg dying, I was going to write this book. It was just something that I was compelled to do. I remember taking notes in my head and everything else, but I couldn't really write it until everything else was cleared out of the way. So when I did leave my job, I knew that this was something I wanted to accomplish that first year. And it took, obviously, as everything, it took longer than I thought, and was much more intricate than I thought. And I didn't know the first thing about being a writer or starting whatever, but I was like, you know what, let's just go for it. And I'll ask people, I'll pull in things. I'm smart. You bring all the skills that you've learned from other jobs and being parents, and I'll just apply it here. And it worked. And I did it, because I would say the biggest failure is not trying, right? So you have to go for it. So I just went for it and I wrote and I had people read it and I edited, and that book came together. And in that process, I really found myself again, and I healed, and I understood why things were. And I felt, gosh, I need to share this story because I had so many emotions and so many troubled times, and I needed to understand them. And I'm sure there's other people out there that need to understand them too. And a lot of it is based not just, I mean, yes, I lost my spouse, but we all lose things. We lose pets, we lose jobs, we lose opportunities. And there's a part of us that's grief, and understanding what grief is and being okay with it, and living with it and moving through it. That's a wonderful gift. And if I can have one person feel less alone and share that, then I have succeeded in what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just love that journey, because obviously you're grieving and you've got a career and children to raise, but coming through that and actually, undertaking such a major project of writing a book. I mean, most people, that think of writing a book, don't have all of that to get through. So I would love to hear like some of your major breakthroughs or lessons that you learned that really propelled you into being able to tackle that book, because there's a lot of, this is a very vulnerable, authentic work that it takes a lot of internal work, I think, to get to the point where you're going to share all that and then do it.
And then do it. I know I'm a very driven person, and I set goals for myself. Sometimes they're loftier than they really need to be, but I discover that along the way. And I remember when I started the book, I took a trip. It's actually how I end the book. I don't want to give too much away. But I'm on this vacation with my girlfriend, and I'm writing, and we're in Cancun, and I'm writing and she's working, and I'm just letting whatever story part of the story comes out. Cause I kept a notebook with me, and it's a silly little book like this. And I kept it by my bedside. And anytime something inspired me, or there was a thought to share, I started writing it out and outlining it and just putting the words down. So before I even began writing, I sort of had the chapters. I want to tell this story. I need to feel through this. Do you remember how this was? And so I would get that going. And after this little fun trip to Mexico to kick off my writing career, I was coming back on the plane with a gentleman who lives in Idaho, and we were talking about the book. And he said, you know what? So many of my friends say they're going to write a book and they never do. So he put his name in my phone, and he says, I want you to text me when this is done, because I want to know about it. So I sort of feel like he gave me this accountability. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. And I did. So I think he probably thinks I'm really weird, because who's this woman who texted me a year and a half after I saw her, but I wrote it. And so as I took these little journeys, and I may put these little accountability tags in with me, and sometimes I made them and sometimes I didn't, but I didn't beat myself up about it. I just sort of reworked and kept going. Some of the chapters were pretty personal, and I knew that, and I knew I would have to go to a very vulnerable space. And there's some chapters I cried the whole time I wrote it. And so I just told my friends, I'm not going to talk to you guys for a week, or I'm going to be gone. So I would sort of check out and write in that space. What I didn't realize from a healing perspective, because I thought, okay, good. If this story now lives somewhere else, it doesn't just have to live in me, and I can let go. And that's a lot of what this was letting go and sort of putting it in perspective so that I honor it, but I move forward. And then I didn't understand the full editing process. And so when I realized, oh my God, I've got to go back and read these chapters over and over and over again and change things, then I was like, oh no, okay. So I sort of, I don't want to say it desensitized me, but I got a lot more comfortable with the material. Because first I thought, write it and shove it out there and just forget about it. But that wasn't the case. It needed to become part of me, and it needed to live in a different spot than where it was before, with the grief and the loss. And so I think that's something I learned a tremendous amount in the whole editing process, and how to put a book together and everything else.
Yeah. You hear that from so many writers, that the writing is the fun part, and then the editing is the actual work.
It's the actual work. And then you have to decide, everybody's got their opinions, and that's really great. And I love hearing perspectives. I love having epiphanies. in moments that I grow as a thinker and a learner.
Yeah.
But then you as the writer have to decide, this is my voice, and no, I'm going to keep this, and I'm not going to do this. And really, you're in charge of your own company, just like anything that you're doing. So I love getting input, but then having the ultimate decision be mine. The biggest one was the cover. I had some women helping me with putting the book together and formatting, and they came up with this cover art, and I didn't like it. And so I for some reason, I think my best at 4 a.m. And so I keep a book by my bed, and often I'll be up between 4 and 6 for a little while, writing notes, or something comes to me. And at that point I was like, I can't, this isn't the right picture. So I went out and on the internet, and I scouted and scouted and scouted. And then when I saw the picture that ends up on the book cover, which is this, I don't know if you guys can see it, this little woman, it's a face and tree, but it's a tree. I saw that and I'm like, oh, that's it. That's the story, because it's a story of hope and love. And yes, we talk about loss, but how rebirth. And I heard this guy, Mark Coker. He is the founder of Smashwords, and he does all about ebook publishing and independent publishing. And part of my journey with this was to take all of his courses to learn about this business, right? It's just another business.
Yeah.
And he said, you got about 8 seconds to capture people's interest with this picture. So it needed to be interesting.
Yeah.
So that's part of what I've done. He is the founder of Smashwords, and he does all of.
So one of the things I love that what I hear you, a couple things I heard you say, that you knew you had a person waiting to, you created that accountability for yourself to get this book done, this project completed. And so I love that. And then just really allowing yourself to go through the process of birthing this book, basically, is what you did, right? This story.
It is. It's a baby. It's definitely. And
you didn't judge yourself based on the timeline. Like, you had some, goals for time, but you didn't really beat yourself up if you didn't make those. You just kept going. And, I see this so often in myself and in my clients, that when we're building a business, we've got goals, we've got our revenue goals and our big goals, and we got, all these things we want to do. And so often we beat ourselves up in the process because we're not meeting those. But it's really all about just keeping going, right? And just loving yourself. You're so tender with yourself, and that really comes out in the book, which was so inspirational to me. It's just like allowing yourself to go through this process of, a really unexpected life change,
right?
From becoming who you were and becoming who you are now.
Exactly. And what the beauty of it is, you're right. You do need to set goals and aspirations, because that keeps us moving, but they're goals for a reason. So we move in a direction, but they're not a marker of whether we really truly are successful or not. And so allowing yourself to be okay with that, because as you go along the path, you learn, and the goals are going to change and the perspective changes. I learned so much about becoming an author in the writing industry in the time I was writing the book. I didn't know that when I started setting those goals. So obviously things will change and evolve. And you just kind of have to laugh through it. And the beauty of it is, you're running your own business, so you get to do that, so often. And when I'm in healthcare or somebody else, it's always somebody else's bottom line or somebody else's objective, and I'm driving to meet their goals. And one of the things that I feel so excited about is, what? I'm doing this for me. And now if I'm going to work this hard, it's going to be for my benefit. And that's exciting for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about, you talk in the book about, your intent with this book is to help others. And, which I think is so profound, because you were going through so much internally and individually, but yet you still were able to think about, I want to get this out, this message that I have to get out to help others. And so what would you say is the message that you really wanted to put out there?
Well, like when I started, I have a good friend of mine, and she's all through the book, Kristen, who is a very seasoned writer. And she says, well, why, what is your intent here? because you don't write books to make a lot of money. You don't. I
Right.
mean, it's just the metrics of that don't work out tremendously well. So I just said, first of all, I felt compelled to understand my story and to feel those feelings and put them in a place. But I said, if I can let someone feel less alone, then I've succeeded, in meaning that there's so much about grief and loss and the journey after that we as a society don't talk about. You don't
Mhm.
see that part on the movies. You don't see the cleanup stuff there. The things happen, but it's like, let's talk about the uncomfortable things. Let's talk about the stuff that you go through afterwards. It's not so pretty. It's not the happily ever after. It's not the, okay, this happened. And so I wanted to share my personal journey with that in the hopes that other people who will go through those same things with some type of grief or loss, to understand that their emotions are normal, the crazy things that they feel, the stuff that they experience, all of that stuff is okay. And it's okay that you feel weird going through it, because nobody really talks about that stuff. And so I guess one of my biggest, when I say goals, is to give a voice to what's often felt but not heard.
Mhm.
That's one of the reasons that I really wanted to write this book.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
wanted to share it, and I wanted to make people think, and I wanted to make people feel. So often people were not given an opportunity to actually feel and process, and sometimes individuals can't, for whatever reason, understand their own emotions, but they can through somebody else's work. And so hopefully that's something. I had a beautiful email from a woman who got my book and read it, and she said she had a very similar story. She lost her husband young. She told me a lot of parallels in the book, and she just said, thank you for saying everything that I thought but couldn't find the words to say. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, that's winning for me. That's great.
Yeah.
And so now, for me now, the journey is to get this book out there, because there's a lot of people who need to read it,
Mhm.
and feel and understand that they're okay and life is messy and we're all going to get through it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I love the process you talked about, excuse me, in the book, where you really just took on the feelings head on. I think it's our instinct a lot of times to want to avoid all the strong feelings, right?
Right.
And push them to the side, or just, stay positive and not. But, we have to allow ourselves to really walk through, all that loss and all that disappointment and the sadness. And there are times in our lives where it's totally fine to be sad. Like, that's the emotion
Yes.
that we
Hmm.
want to choose. And so I love how you really talk
Yeah,
through that.
it's yeah, and it's right, accepting those emotions, breathe through them, don't let them own you totally, but you have to feel them, because until you do that, you can't get on the other side.
Mm,
This stuff will stay inside you and it will eat at you, unless you kind of honor it and let it out.
mhm.
And so that was important to me to work through that.
And how did you come to that? I mean, was that something that was already instinctive to you, or did you learn that through this process?
It's somewhat instinctive, but I think also I learned it. As much as I kind of knew it, I too avoided it, and I think that was close to the year before I left my job as a CEO. I could feel it. My heart knew I needed to walk away. Everything, my soul knew it, but my head had to get there. And then once I did it, I was like, okay, this is it, because it wasn't serving me to be there anymore, because part of being at work was to avoid dealing with what you know what I mean? I could
Yeah.
compartmentalize life. Well, I wasn't able to do that anymore. And so it was like, girl, you've got to deal with all of this. And this is where your energy needs to go now. Both my children were starting freshman year in high school and freshman year in college. They needed me more than ever. I needed me. My dad had cancer, and there was a limited amount of time I was going to have him. I was like, you know what, this isn't where you need to be in your life right now. You need to do this, and you've worked your way to be, simplify your life and just be a mom and take care of yourself for a year. I'd worked for 30 years. It's like, you'd work at 30 years right out of college. Take a break. You've deserved this, you've earned this, and it's the right thing for you. And so that's kind of how I got there.
Yeah. Yeah. So how was that transition? What was that like for you?
It was it was a little interesting because you're used to being so, I have to be here, and there's a lot to do. And um, then I'm like, this is going to be fun because, I said, well, I wrote this in the book, but I wanted to be one of those girls you see in the coffee shops in their yoga wear at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, just having a Starbucks or something. Cause like, I want to do that. I just want to sort of have my life be what would it be like? And I learned pretty quickly that I'll never be bored. I love people and I love to do things. So I joined a gym and I got this, I'm at the gym with all the other ladies that don't work during the day. And that was just a fun crowd to be with, lots of young moms and everything else. And I went to a writing workshop. I got onto some other things. I mean, I kept myself engaged with people, but just doing things that I wanted to do. And then there's a lot about being a stay-at-home mom that's great, but it's also not so great. I'm more present in my young daughter's life, who's an angsty teenager, and she didn't really want me there.
Right.
So, my son handled it pretty, but my daughter's just like, oh God, okay. She first thought I was her Sherpa. This is great. Mom's going to be home more so she can drive me to school and take me here and have lunch with me. And like, I was just going to be her little toy. And I'm like, that's not really the case, honey. So we had to work that out. But what I realized that was the most important was sometimes she didn't want to talk, or sometimes they didn't want me around. I mean, there's all this stuff that goes on, but I just needed to be there. And so I can't say it was always fun, but it was the right thing to do. And as we've come through that now, my daughter said something about a year into it that I held on to. She just said, she came home from school and she had to write something about the important things in her life. And she said the time that my mom became my friend. And it was really the time I left my job. And I was more there for her. And even though she didn't always love me and she didn't verbalize that I was there, it did mean a lot to her that I was home. And then I remember saying to my son, I've always said, the thing that hit me that right after I learned Greg died and had haunted me is that my children don't have a father, and there's nothing I can do about that. That, as a mom, you want to fix everything. And that's not fixable, never be. And I said that to Jackson about a year or so ago. And he said, Mom, he says, it's okay. If we hadn't been through that, there's so many people that we have met and things that have happened in our lives that are positive that wouldn't happen because of it. So don't worry about that. It's going to be fine. And that just felt so good to my heart. For sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what was that journey like as a mother, like helping your children to process losing their father? Because I know for me, my daughter's 11, similar to what your daughter's age, and I would want to just do it for them.
Well, you do. Yeah. And you want to, and you can't. And then they only have so much emotional capacity to grieve. She was very tearful right away. Jackson was frozen, and both of them had anxiety. And I think the first year after the school year, they didn't learn anything. They were just there, but they weren't really there. Jackson had a lot of anxiety. And so we got him into counseling and he started on some medication. That helped him a lot. He really liked having an hour to talk with someone who just listened to everything he had to say. And it wasn't his mom, you know what I mean? He could just talk to her. And so that worked out really well. Kate tried it, but she didn't love it. It took years. She cried more at the beginning, but it took years for her to process. And it wasn't probably until I left work and until she got a little older that she could really understand her emotions. And she had a lot of trauma, PTSD based on the night that we found out and everything else. And so we ended up going to Pathways Hospice, and she did some EMDR, some special tapping, therapy that helps reprocess your brain to not panic to events. And she hated going, but we still did it. And then we stopped after so many months, and I'm like, okay, well, we tried that. And then about 6 months later, typical kid, she goes, I didn't tell you at the time, but I think that really helped me. I'm like, okay, great. So, we tried, sometimes we failed, but we just kept talking about things and taking the avenues that are out in the community to help heal yourself. I went to a widows group. We did a family group at hospice, and I thought, oh gosh, we're going to go in there with a bunch of old ladies and it's going to be young me. And that's what it is. And it couldn't have been further from the truth. I walked in and I sat in that room, and it was a bunch of women, many of them lost husbands tragically. And they all had children. It was like, wow, okay, this is different. And you learn, there's a lot of different stories. You learn to be grateful for some of the things that you didn't have to go through. There's a lot of secondary losses with a loss like this, be it whether you can't stay at your job or you can't live in the home that you live in. And, we fortunately didn't have to experience those, but talking with others, they did, and how they handled it. And you got to meet people in different levels. So I think just talking and sharing and being with people, that's important. And I learned a lot about others, but more importantly, I learned a lot about myself. And one of the things I learned in one of the first groups was, being such a driven person like all of you guys are, I'm like, okay, let's just kick this grief thing in the butt and we'll get through it and I'll just move on. And then when someone talked about something and it's like, oh, wait a minute, it never goes away. You can't get through this. Like, it doesn't just, you don't just process it and it's gone. It just becomes a part of you. And I was like, crap, okay, all right, I'm going to have to approach this in a different manner. And then that's sort of how I went through the thoughts of how I was going to process and own and put my grief in perspective for my life.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the transition of your change in identity from, obviously it's been a lot of change and you talk about, going from a wife to a widow, but now the transition of going from CEO to writer. You were kind of in that process when you wrote the book, but I would love to hear like how it's going now. It's quite an identity shift.
It's definitely, you as a CEO, you walk into the hospital or the organization and everybody wants to hear what you have to say, and they ask your opinion and they ask them this and that and the other. And that's all wonderful. And I love fostering growth in people and organizations and creating positive cultures. But it was so refreshing for me to not have to do that, to not be the one that has to be there every Christmas and Thanksgiving. The first holiday season, when the kids and I weren't at the hospital eating Thanksgiving dinner in my office, after we'd served it to the patients, I was like, oh, wow. Because I ran an organization that was 24/7, 365. And so it's thankless in some ways. So I enjoyed that transition quite well. It was getting used to. The other thing that I sort of was ready to hang up on is being the one that had to make all the decisions for others. I don't mind, not for myself, but all of those decisions. So it's kind of like, oh, I don't matter like that anymore. And I kind of liked that. It was just a different, I don't matter in that way. And that's nice. So now I can have relationships with these people in a different way, because I like many of the people that I worked with, but I knew that I needed to be away for a while before we got in touch again, because I'm not their boss, and I'm their friend. So that part was good. There's a little bit of anxiety to the fact of what are you doing with your life? I think my daughter was like, when are you going back to work? We're going to be poor. This is horrible. And I'm like, honey, don't worry. I have a plan and it's okay. We're not going to be destitute on the street. But she was quite concerned, but she might've been that way because she just didn't want me in the house looking over her. But so it was not always easy, but it was easier than I thought. But I think a lot of it was because that year prior to me leaving, I was starting to make those divisions and seeing that I needed to step away and I wanted to take a break and I wanted a rest from things. And they called me 6 months ago and said, are you done with this book thing? You ready to come back and be a CEO?
Oh my gosh.
Like, are you done with this creative thing yet? And are you interested in hopping back on board? And I'm like, no. I said, the book's not out yet. I know I got to take this journey. And I kind of knew when I walked away that I was either going to find my next thing or it's going to find me. And so I need to see where the book thing goes, do with all that, and then just sort of venture into what I want to do next. And I do like the idea of being my own boss and looking at things differently. And so would I hop back in the CEO chair tomorrow? Probably not. Loved every minute of it and grew and learned so much, but I want to do something different. Whatever that is, I want to do something different. And I think one of the things I felt is I wanted to make a difference or touch people possibly on a grander scale. And potentially through my writings in this book, I can do that. And then we'll just see where it goes. I'm trying to just keep my heart open and know that it will find me or I'll fall into it, whatever that is.
Yay, that's so exciting. So what's been the most fun for you during this process after, having published the book?
Well, okay. One of the things that's fun is I worked with this group in Loveland called What If Ideation, and they helped me with hooking up with editors and doing sort of the formatting and the business end of things. And I branded myself and I'm my LLC and all that nice stuff, which is so fun. And they go, Beth, you don't understand. And I'm like, okay, let's do the marketing because I've got to market this book, right? I'm going to have to get myself out there, talk about it, get on all the platforms, regardless of COVID and all the things that aren't happening right now. But because honestly, this is a great time for a book like this because unfortunately it's been a tumultuous year for everyone. And there are a lot of people could benefit from reading it and again, feeling less alone. So they go, most writers don't want to do any of the marketing or talk about things or do stuff. And I'm like, oh, I do, because I love talking with people, sharing my story, getting out there, seeing what else is out there, learning things. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today and to see what opportunities I am to share my story, to learn more, honestly, to gain more material for the next book, because I've already started it. So I kind of am a believer in trilogies. So I feel like there's at least 3 books in me.
Wow.
And so I know. And oh, here comes my kitty. One of the things that you learn about, getting your name out there is it's not only your first book, but it's writing your second one. And there's more to the story. So in the back of the first book, you guys will read what's coming next, but it's a lot of, the book's going to be called Sandwiched, and it's essays of life in the in-between. And it's all where we find ourselves and sort of the journey next with me being a single parent of budding teenagers and all that happens there, dealing with aging parents and just, oh my God, the shock of the fact that I'm single at 50 and I never realized that was going to happen. And how my journey through some of the silly things that I've done and the decisions that I've made. So I think that's the next book and the next story to tell. I like to tell stories that people don't, and look at things that people don't necessarily think about and make them think about them. So
yeah, and you do such a great job in this book. I mean, it's so authentic and so genuine. And just really, it is so honest, but full of so much wisdom. I mean, some of the things that greatest lessons, and we talked about these today, of what I took from it is that, when you're going through challenges, and even building a business is a challenge. So when you're going through challenges, whether it is the horrible thing that you had to go through with losing your husband, or just challenges of building a business, it's about creating that accountability and surrounding yourself with a community and reaching out for help and allowing others to help you. And then also just feeling through those feelings, like allowing all of the feelings and not making it mean that there's something wrong, that this is like all part of the process.
Exactly.
And
you say allowing others to help you. And that's something that I stuck to that one because everybody cares and there are no words to say to someone who's lost something like I did, but there are ways to help, but people don't know how. And I understand that. They're in shock, they're grieving too, and they don't know what to do. But they said, hey, if I can help. And boy, did I not make a list. I made a list of all of the people I knew and what their talents were. And so when I needed something, I called them. If I knew this guy was a handy guy, hey, come on, I need to do this done. Or I knew this, I picked up and I called, and you know what? They wanted to help me. So I think that is a big thing, is we don't ask each other for help and we don't share enough and do that. you don't have to lose someone to do that, but do that, because surrounding yourself with people and talented people and smart people that hold you up for many reasons is really important. And I think that's one of the ways that I did get through so quickly is keeping a community around me.
Yeah, that's so great, because it's, you prevented yourself from being isolated that way too. And then, allowing other people to help you, you're, accepting that love and assistance, and so it's just a great cycle that it creates.
Right. And it's not a weakness to ask for help or accept it. And then what happens is you end up giving back to them more than you've even realized. And I think that's really important, especially in what's going on and how isolated we are today. And I think this year's taught us a lot of life lessons.
Yeah.
What's really important. And it is people, and it's our relationships. So it's worth the work to keep those going, for sure.
Awesome. Such a great point. Such a great point. So I wanted to read just like the last little, the end of the book, how you end the book. And because I think it's just a great way to bring this all together. And this is what it says. We drank in the brilliance of being, and on the plane home vowed to bottle it, to help each other remember the beauty of simply existing. We promised ourselves to always ask why not when questioned why, to believe in the infinite possibilities life possesses, and to go beyond where the pavement ends. The end. Or is it? I think not. Time for a new beginning. I just love that. Yeah. And such a great journey. And thank you so much for being here to share it with us. And
my honor.
Yeah. And the book is Tragically Beautiful: Essays of Love, Loss, and Hope. And I will put a link in the comments immediately following this, because I don't think I have it. I don't have it right on my computer, but I will put that in the comments. And so we have a link to it. So folks can go and check it out, because it's such a great book. We don't generally, unless we've been through loss, really get excited about picking up books about loss, but this one has so much hope and so many great lessons, I think, for life, for all of us. And thank you so much.
Yes, and that's great, because I appreciate you saying that, because it is more than a book for someone who's lost someone. It's really a story for everyone.
It is such a great story. So much wisdom, and for building a business, for being a parent, and just because we, like you said, we're all going to go through ups and downs in our lives, and that's just part of life. So
yeah.
So thank you so much for your courage and bravery and sharing all that you did in the book and here today. And I just really feel honored to know you.
Well, again, it was my pleasure to be here, and I'd also love to stay connected with you guys in any way possible. And if anybody has, you're going to put the link to the book, but also I have a website, bethbullard.com, and my email's on there. So if anybody wants to reach out for me or has any questions or wants to know more about anything, I'm more than happy to be of assistance.
I'm going to put your website in the comments. And we would love to invite you to be a member of our group now that you're an entrepreneur.
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
And we just support and encourage women that are growing businesses. So yes, I spelled that correctly, hopefully. All right, Beth, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to having you in the group.
Sounds great. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.
Bye.